Okay, so here we have the starter that's been overnight. We built it last night. It has the 17 grams of starter that's been fed and ready, and the 165 grams of water and 165 grams of flour. And this starter now is ready for us to add the flour and the water to it. So now we're going to add the water, and I'm weighing it. And the water that we're going to add for the final dough is going to be 395 grams. So I'm watching very carefully. You could also measure the water separate if you like. And now I'm just going to take my scraper and just start mixing the water and the starter together. One of the ways that you can tell that the starter is ready because it floats. So I'm mixing it up, but I could see that it was floating prior to me mixing it, because if it floats, the minute you put it in, it'll start to float. So that's a good indication that your starter is active and ready for baking. So I'm just keeping on the mixing. So next, I'm going to add the flour. And we're adding, for the final dough, 659 grams of flour. And I'm just going to add it all in, looking at my scale, making sure that I'm getting close to the grams. Some teachers say you can go over grams or under, maybe 5 on each side. I've had one teacher that said that. And yet I've had another teacher say in the same class that you need to be exact. So I think 1 or 2, either way, you're close enough. But in salt, you kind of want to be right on the money. But with flour and water, you could. So I see I'm taking out a little bit just to make sure that I'm on the money. So next, what I'm going to do is mix it. So you want to put it on a sturdy table and just start mixing. See, I'm folding, turning my bowl and kind of folding to mix, to make sure the water is mixing well enough with flour. And you want to keep mixing until it's all incorporated. I'll show you this in its entirety just so you can see how long it will take to do that. So it'll start to come together in a cohesive ball, and it's a sticky, kind of tacky kind of dough. So now it's getting a little harder to flip and fold sort of thing. But you can see it's coming together. So now I'll take my scraper. This is one of the other things the scraper is really handy for. It's getting that off. Some teachers say don't be afraid to handle the dough and get your hands sticky. But I like to wet my hands, because if you're working with a high hydration dough and you wet your hands, it doesn't stick as much. Okay, giving it time for the flour and the water to just kind of meld together and just kind of get ready for the next step. So next thing I'm going to do is measure my salt. Now it has 16 grams of salt. Remember I told you, always measure your salt separate. I'm using kosher salt. It's about a tablespoon or so. Now, one trick I learned recently in my last class is that, well, I learned two, actually. Some teachers, they'll put the salt in and just leave it there so they know that they have to add the salt. Or the last class, we just sprinkled it on, and that was it. So we'll put the cover on, and we will let it sit for 20 minutes to just absorb all the liquid in the flour, and then we'll come back. Now we're going to do some series of stretch and folds. So we're just kind of pulling the dough up, flipping it on itself. This is the classic stretch and fold. You're just starting to develop the gluten in the dough, so you need to do this to provide structure to the bread. Otherwise, it'll be dense and kind of gummy. So this is a really important step. So you can see I'm just kind of flipping it over. And I'm starting with this. The more you work with the dough, the more cohesive it will become. But when you first start, it's going to be really sticky and really kind of gooey. So another way you can do it is just stretch it in your hands and just pull it and stretch it. I have one formula I do this with because it's a little less hydration. But this is a way that you can do it as well. So the other way that you're going to do, and this is what I learned in class, is called a slap and fold. You're just slapping the bread dough down and turning it and folding it. So pick it up, slap it, then you're going to turn it, then fold it. Pick it up, slap it, turn it, fold it. This is probably, in my opinion, the best way to knead bread if you're going to try to knead it. And I won't make you watch all of this, but I kept doing this for maybe 5 minutes. And you can see that it becomes less and less sticky as you do it. Okay, just a quick trick I want to show you about dry washing your hands. Instead of going right under the sink, because if you put a lot of flour and water in your sink, you're going to clog it up. What we learned in class is just to get extra flour and put it on our hands and just use the hand washing motion of just washing our hands with flour. When you're in class for days at a time, you just kind of get used to having flour stuck on your hands. And the teachers, don't typically think that's a bad thing if you have flour on your hands if you're baking. So I just wanted to show you this because this is a trick that I had never learned, and it is useful if you have your hands in sticky dough. So now it's stopped. It's been sitting for an hour because you have to let it sit for an hour and then do some more turns. So here I'm doing a few more turns, and you can see how the dough has become a lot more supple, a lot more soft. Sorry about my cutting board there. It's actually not the cutting board moving, it's the board under the cutting board that keeps moving. So look, you can tell that it's really coming together now, and that's just after 1 hour of sitting in the plastic container that I originally put it in. So I'm going to put it back in, and then we're going to leave it for another hour. Okay, now it's been the 2 hours, and we're going to take it out, and we'll go to the next step, which would be step number 7, where we're going to take some lightly floured surface, and that's a fair amount. You could do probably a little bit less than that, but you don't want to incorporate any more flour into the dough. So now we're going to turn it on the work surface. And so I'm just kind of turning it around just to keep it from sticking, just to put a little more flour around it. And I'm going to cut it in half. Well, actually, I'm going to cut mine a little less. And I'm eyeballing it, but you can weigh it if you want to have, this bread makes 2 700-gram loaves. So if you want to measure it. And so what I'm doing now is just pre-shaping it, and this is a very important step. Do not miss this step. See, I'm just pulling it together, and I'm just gently making it into a ball, and we're going to let it rest. This is called a bench rest and baking. So again, I'm just folding it over each other and just going to let it rest. So this is a really, like I said, this is the important step. You don't want to skip this step. And one of mine is larger than the other because I use 2 different size pots when I make this particular bread. This, by the way, is the formula out of all the classes I've taken. This is the formula I use the most. Now we're going to go to preparing our baskets. Now I'm going to put mine in a Banneton basket I have. So you see how I'm going around the edge? That's very important. I have a lot of flour in the middle from previous. I don't wash these. You could also do this with a linen towel in a bowl. You don't have to have it. When I first started, I had Easter baskets, which I cut the handle off of, and I had tea towels in it. So don't feel like you have to buy an expensive basket to put it in. I've just been baking for 12 years, and I've accumulated these things over the years. When you're first starting out, you don't need a lot of fancy ingredients. So see how I'm turning? I'll show you the next one. I'm using my hands, and I'm just pulling, I'm dragging the bread a bit, and I'm tightening the bottom. This is very important for the spring in your loaves. You're just tightening and finishing it. It's really a critical step, I have learned. So I'm just going to put mine in the basket, and I have also floured that one as well. And then I'm using my shower caps for these particular formulas. And I'm going to hurry the process along, so I'm going to put mine in my oven because I have a proofing button on my oven, and I proofed them for about 2 hours. Okay, here it is, folks, fresh out of the oven. When your bread comes right out of the oven, you can hear it. It sings to you. It starts to crackle because it starts to immediately be exposed to the air, and it makes it sort of shrink, I guess.